Black Bear Bed and Breakfast Murders. Over Labor Day weekend in 2006, 4 people were taken at the Black Bear Bed and Breakfast in Newry, Maine. The inn sat in the western mountains near Bethel, surrounded by hiking trails and ski resorts. The kind of place people came to disappear from their problems, not to disappear permanently. Julie Bullard, 65, owned the property. She had moved from San Francisco to Maine in 2004, looking for a fresh start. Her daughter, Selby Bullard, 30, was a young mother of 2 who had recently lost her husband in a car accident and had just earned her real estate license. Cindy Beatson, 43, was Selby's friend and co-worker at Apple Tree Realty in Bethel. James Whitehurst, 50, a father of 4 from Arkansas who had survived childhood polio, was living at the inn as a handyman. All 4 were gone by the time the long weekend ended, and the person responsible had been working his regular shifts at a restaurant down the road the entire time. Christian Charles Nielsen was 31 years old, a line cook at the Sudbury Inn in Bethel. Born in Rumford, Maine, he had studied English at the University of Maine but never graduated. Co-workers described him as a reliable, soft-spoken, and quiet guy. During his police interrogation after his arrest, he revealed something that reframed everything. From the age of 13 to 26, he had fantasized about taking lives and aspired to become a serial killer. He had been waiting for over a decade to act on it, and when he finally did not stop at one. On Friday, September 1st, Nielsen invited Whitehurst fishing in nearby Upton. After stopping at Subway for lunch, they drove to a wooded area where Nielsen shot Whitehurst multiple times in the head. He left the body in the woods and went to work his shift at the Sudbury Inn. The next day, he returned and burned the body with gasoline. On Sunday, September 3rd, he broke down Julie Bullard's bedroom door while she slept and shot her 3 times. He dragged her body into the woods and cut it in half with an axe and hacksaw, wrapped the halves in a tarp, and went to work his restaurant shift. On Labor Day, September 4th, Nielsen borrowed a chainsaw from his own father in Bryant Pond. When Selby Bullard and Cindy Beatson arrived unexpectedly at the inn, he shot both women and dismembered their bodies with the chainsaw. He cut off their fingers and kept their rings in a duffel bag. That evening, Nielsen called his father and invited him to the inn, claiming Julie was away in California. His father and stepmother drove out that night and discovered a body outside. His father called 911 immediately. His stepmother called a second time after Nielsen confessed to her on the spot. Police arrested him without resistance. He gave a detailed 2-hour confession, even directing detectives to Whitehurst's hidden remains. Nielsen initially pleaded not guilty, then launched a hunger strike in jail, dropping from 158 to 103 pounds. He carved an X into his scalp with a disposable razor. Diagnosed with schizoid personality disorder and Asperger's syndrome, he attempted an insanity defense. But one day before jury selection on October 9th, 2007, he dropped the defense and pleaded guilty to all 4 counts. He was sentenced to 4 concurrent life sentences. He told the court, "I just want to say I'm sorry for what I did." He smiled as he left the courtroom after being charged. Selby's son Elliot had his statement read aloud, titled, "How My Life Changed and I Was Forever Wounded." State Police Chief Colonel Craig Poulin called it a crime of horrific proportions. Nielsen remains at Maine State Prison in Warren, where he will spend the rest of his life. He worked restaurant shifts between dismembering his victims. He borrowed a chainsaw from his own father. And it was his father who walked into the scene and ended it all. How long would Nielsen have continued if his father had not driven out that night? But while Nielsen's crimes unfolded in the quiet mountains of western Maine, the next case played out in the bars and streets of Portland. And it was a mother's phone call that would become the most devastating piece of evidence at trial. Amy St. Laurent. On the night of October 20th, 2001, 25-year-old Amy St. Laurent went out with a platonic friend named Eric Rubright to Portland's Old Port District. Amy was a South Portland high school graduate working as a secretary at Pratt & Whitney. She lived independently in South Berwick with her cat, Alex. She was responsible, family-oriented, and never missed work. She would never leave her cat unattended. Those details would matter enormously in the weeks that followed, because Amy did not come home that night. At the Pavilion Dance Club, Amy met Jeffrey Russ Gorman, 21, who had drifted to Portland from Florida with a history of juvenile convictions. When Rubright went to the restroom around 1 in the morning, Amy left with Gorman's group to an after-party on Brighton Avenue. Around 2 in the morning, Amy asked to be driven back downtown. Gorman offered the ride. She was never seen alive again. The investigation's first break came from an unlikely source. A Westbrook police traffic stop placed Gorman on the road at 3:14 in the morning, driving in the wrong direction from Portland toward his mother's house in Scarborough. That single data point destroyed his claim that he had dropped Amy off and gone straight home. He said he drove her back downtown. The traffic stop proved he drove in the opposite direction. In the following weeks, Gorman obsessively cleaned his car, scrubbing the interior repeatedly, told a friend they're not going to find her body, and eventually fled to Alabama to put as much distance between himself and Portland as he could. On December 8, 2001, 55 days after Amy vanished, a cadaver dog named Reba alerted on a wooded spot off Route 22 in Scarborough, just 150 yards from the road and near Gorman's mother's home. Detective Danny Young uncovered a Pratt & Whitney sweatshirt in a shallow grave. Amy's body was found still, had been buried just yards from a road her night out, with a gunshot wound to the head and evidence of being incapacitated with a substance beforehand. She had been buried just yards from a road her own sister drove on every single day. The most devastating moment in the case came the next day. Gorman's mother, Tammy Westbrook, received a call from her son. In a 22-minute phone call, Gorman confessed everything. He told her he had taken hallucinogens, looked at Amy and seen his mother's face, pulled out his weapon and fired. Westbrook told a friend through tears what her son had said. The friend urged her to call police. Westbrook replied, "I can't. He's my baby." So the friend made the call instead. Gorman was cornered in Troy, Alabama, triggering a nearly 6-hour armed standoff that ended when he traded his 2 weapons for a cigarette and a soda. At trial in January 2003, his mother took the stand and claimed complete amnesia about the confession. She told the court her son was innocent and that in her heart, he was a good boy. But prosecutor William Stokes made a bold move. He asked the judge to play the sealed recording of Westbrook's earlier grand jury testimony, her own voice under oath, recounting her son's detailed confession in full. The jury heard every word she had said under oath. They heard her describe what Gorman told her on the phone that day. And then they looked at the woman sitting on the witness stand, who was now claiming she remembered none of it. Gorman was convicted and sentenced to 60 years, minimum 51. He is at Maine State Prison, eligible for release around 2054. In 2023, Gorman wrote a letter to the Maine legislature admitting he had shot and taken his victim's life, while advocating for parole reinstatement. He now trains service dogs for wounded veterans from inside prison. Amy's sister Julie had driven past the shallow grave on County Road multiple times daily for 7 weeks. Without knowing, her sister lay beneath the soil, just 150 yards from the road she took every morning. The Amy St. Laurent Foundation has taught self-defense to thousands of women in her memory. Amy was 25 years old. She went out on a Saturday night in Portland and never came home. A traffic stop, a cadaver dog, and a mother who could not keep her son's secret are the reasons anyone knows what happened to her at all. But while Amy's case was solved by a mother's confession and a cadaver dog, the next one has no such resolution. 20 years later, nobody knows who took the life of the most beloved man in Wilton, Maine. Raymond Butch Weed. Raymond Butch Weed was 40 years old and one of the most liked people in Wilton, Maine, a town of about 4,100 residents in Franklin County. He owned New Horizons Builders, a construction company he ran himself. He coached youth football, taught Sunday school at his church, and plowed more than 40 driveways each winter, many of them for free, because the people who needed help the most were the ones who could least afford to pay for it. Every single day, without exception, he stopped at Mario's Pizzeria on Main Street for decaf coffee and a chocolate-glazed donut. It was the kind of routine that made him easy to find and impossible to forget. The town manager called him one of the nicest people I ever met. On the evening of December 23rd, 2003, the night before Christmas Eve, two friends arrived at Butch's white Cape-style home on Main Street around 7:30 to deliver Christmas gifts. They found him on the floor near his home office entrance. He had been shot sometime between 5:30 and 7 that evening, after leaving Mario's at his usual time and heading home for the night. That morning, he had called his sister Donna, excitedly describing presents he had bought for his nieces and nephews. It was the family's first Christmas without their father, who had passed earlier that year. They had planned to spend the holiday together as a family. They never got to spend it with Butch either. Maine State Police set up a roadblock 6 days after the incident, stopping drivers during the same evening hours to ask if they had seen anything unusual on the night of December 23rd. Nearly 100 people were interviewed in the weeks that followed. Police kept the cause of passing secret for 2 full weeks, hoping the withheld detail would prove useful to the investigation, perhaps causing the responsible person to say something inconsistent. The town rumor mill turned relentlessly in the absence of official information. One local told reporters, "People just think that he made somebody mad, real mad. I've even heard it was a professional hit," in a town where everyone knew everyone. That kind of speculation was both inevitable and painful for the Weed family. A $10,000 reward offered by the Weed family has gone unclaimed for over 2 decades. Police have never publicly named a suspect or a person of interest. No arrest has ever been made. No indictment has ever been handed down. New forensic technology was applied to the original evidence around 2013, but no public breakthrough resulted from the re-examination. The case was featured on the Dark Down East podcast, which received more listener requests about Butch Weed than almost any other case they have ever covered. A testament to how deeply the story resonates with people who hear it. Butch's mother, Elaine Weed, passed in April 2018 without ever learning who was responsible for her son's passing. His sister Rachel said in 2023, "20 years is a lifetime of no answers." The case remains open and active with the Maine State Police Unsolved Homicide Unit. Detective Corporal Reed Bond continues to follow leads. A town of 4,000 people, a man everyone knew by name, a man who plowed driveways for free and bought Christmas presents for his nieces and nephews on the last morning of his life, shot in his own home on the night before Christmas Eve, at a time when Main Street would have been quiet and dark and cold. And in more than 20 years, not a single person has come forward with the information that solves it. The reward sits unclaimed. The family waits. Butch Weed's donut routine at Mario's has become part of Wilton's folklore, a daily ritual that ended on a December evening and has never been explained. His sister has spent 2 decades asking the same question. His mother went to her grave without an answer. How does someone that well-known, that well-liked, in a town that small, get shot in their own home 2 days before Christmas, and nobody in town talks? Somebody in Wilton knows something. After 20 years, they still have not said a word. But while the Weed case remained silent after 2 decades, the next one was solved within days, and the person responsible told police exactly why he did it. In his own words. Amity triple murder. On June 22, 2010, in the small town of Amity in Aroostook County, Maine, 3 people were found in and around a trailer on Route 1. Jeffrey Ryan, 55, was a disabled Vietnam veteran who lived in the trailer. His son Jesse, a young boy visiting from his mother's home in Lewiston, was there for the weekend. Jesse's mother was 6 months pregnant at the time, and Jesse was excited about becoming a big brother. He was the class clown at school, the kind of kid who undercut his teacher's pencil business by selling them for 5 cents instead of 10. Jason DeHaan, 30, was a neighbor and close friend who stopped by nearly every day. Thane Ormsby was 20 years old, an Ellsworth High School dropout who had arrived in the area just 3 weeks before the events, moving in with Robert and Joy Strout in nearby Orient. Ormsby was reportedly involved with Jeffrey Ryan's teenage daughter Mariah, and Jeff Ryan objected to the relationship. Robert Strout had allegedly told Ormsby that Ryan was dealing in illicit substances. Police found 0 evidence to support that claim. Ormsby armed himself with a combat-style knife and went to Ryan's trailer. He struck Jeffrey Ryan in a shed while Ryan had his back turned. "I didn't try to be fancy. I wanted to be quick," Ormsby later told police. He then took Jason DeHaan's life. Jesse was harmed while trying to flee in his bedroom. The judge would later note that all 3 experienced conscious pain and suffering before the end. Jesse and DeHaan were targeted to eliminate potential witnesses. What happened next was almost as shocking as the act itself. Ormsby told Robert Strout what he had done. Instead of calling police, Strout drove Ormsby to a bog mound to dispose of the weapon, helped him burn a stolen truck to destroy evidence, and then drove him across state lines to New Hampshire to hide. When Maine State Police came to the Strout home days later to ask about the case, Ormsby was sleeping in a back room of the same house, and the Strouts said nothing. They looked detectives in the eye and offered no information. Robert Strout even appeared on camera praising Jeffrey Ryan as a great father, while secretly harboring the very person who had taken Ryan's life. A Bangor Daily News reporter sat at Joy Strout's kitchen table for an interview, while Ormsby sat right there in the room, unknown to the journalist. The reporter had no idea she was conducting an interview in the presence of the person responsible for 3 lives ending. DNA from a beer can and cigarette butt recovered at the scene matched Ormsby. On June 30th, 2010, he was arrested in Dover, New Hampshire. During interrogation, he confessed in detail, "Somewhere in the subconscious of my mind, I developed myself as an assassin." At trial in April 2012, the jury convicted Ormsby on all counts and rejected his insanity defense. He received 3 consecutive life sentences plus 15 years for arson. The judge noted he was tied for 2nd place in the annals of mass acts in Maine. Robert Strout pleaded guilty to hindering apprehension and arson, received 4 years, and has since passed. Ormsby has filed at least 4 appeals through state and federal courts, all denied. He will never leave prison. A man who had been in town for 3 weeks took 3 lives, called himself an assassin, and was harbored by the very people who should have turned him in. The journalist sitting across from Joy Strout had no idea the person she was protecting was in the next room. Jeffrey Ryan was a disabled veteran who served his country and came home to a trailer in Aroostook County. His son Jesse was visiting for the weekend because he was excited about his mother's pregnancy. Jason DeHaan was a neighbor who stopped by because that's what neighbors do in small-town Maine. 3 people who trusted the world around them were gone because a 20-year-old dropout who had been in the area for 21 days decided he had the right to take their lives. And the couple who took him in helped him run. But while the Amity case involved a stranger who arrived in town and destroyed a family, the next one happened inside a family, carried out by the victim's own son and his 2 friends over something as ordinary as a car ride home. Kimberly Maranovas. Kimberly Maranovas, 47, had moved from Ashland, Massachusetts to Litchfield, Maine about a year before her passing, looking for a fresh start. She was studying cosmetology at the Aveda Institute in Augusta, had participated in a fashion show just 2 weeks before, and classmates described her as really happy. She was rebuilding her life in a new state. Her son Lucas, a teenager diagnosed on the autism spectrum with severe behavioral issues, had been expelled from every school system in Massachusetts. He resented the move to Maine. His friends William Smith and Thomas T.J. Severance had traveled from Massachusetts to visit. Kimberly herself had invited them, hoping to ease her son's isolation in a new place where he had no friends. On the morning of April 21, 2018, Kimberly confronted the boys about missing marijuana and told Smith and Severance she would not drive them back to Massachusetts. That refusal set everything in motion. What followed was hours of deliberate planning that moved through multiple methods before settling on a final approach. Smith suggested they take her life and take the car. The first plan was to steal the car, but they rejected it because she would find it and report it. The second plan was to crush Lucas's prescription pills into her wine and stage a scene to make it look self-inflicted. That attempt failed because the pills would not dissolve properly in the liquid. So they moved to a third plan. They spent the rest of the day and evening waiting for the right moment. At 12:15 in the morning on April 22nd, Lucas put on a mask and gloves, armed himself with a kitchen knife from the kitchen, and entered his mother's bedroom. He got onto her bed and began strangling her. Kimberly woke up and fought back with everything she had. The judge would later describe what happened as akin to torture, noting she was conscious and aware throughout the entire ordeal. Lucas and Smith used their forearms, while Lucas also used the knife on her neck. Severance stayed downstairs with the family dog and did not participate in the act itself. The boys packed an Xbox, a bong, and Kimberly's remaining marijuana, then fled in her car with Smith driving. They did not get far. A Maine state trooper pulled them over almost immediately after spotting something suspicious. They were driving slowly down a dirt road with the headlights off in the middle of the night. They initially told the trooper that someone else had broken into the house and harmed Kimberly. All 3 eventually confessed to what had actually happened. The most disturbing detail emerged later, during the period when all 3 were being held before trial. While detained together at Long Creek Youth Development Center, the 3 were caught repeatedly chanting "Murder Gang" and "MG" while making stabbing motions with their hands. They had given themselves a name. They had turned what they did into a slogan. A defense psychologist suggested they might have been joking. The prosecution did not find it amusing. Neither did the families who had to sit in the courtroom and hear about it. Smith, identified as the prime mover who first suggested the act, was sentenced to 28 years. Lucas received 33 years for what he did to his own mother. Severance, who backed out of the act itself, pleaded guilty to conspiracy and was sentenced to juvenile detention until the age of 21. At sentencing, Kimberly's sister said, "He was loved and accepted no matter what, but our love was not enough." Her mother added about Lucas, "He wasn't a leader, he was a follower. I think he wanted friends so bad, he would do anything. A mother invited her son's friends into her home because she wanted him to feel less alone in a state where he knew nobody. They spent hours planning how to end her life. They tried 3 different methods before settling on one that worked. And when they were caught driving her car down a dirt road with the headlights off less than an hour later, they told police someone else had done it. Then they chanted about it in detention. Kimberly Maranovas moved to Maine for a fresh start. She was 47 years old and studying cosmetology. She had been in a fashion show 2 weeks earlier. She was rebuilding. Her son and his 2 friends made sure she would never get the chance to finish. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. But while the Maranovas case happened behind closed doors, the next one was captured in real time on a Snapchat video that recorded the very moment the person responsible struck. Rhonda Patalena. On March 26, 2021, 35-year-old Rhonda Patalena brought her on-again, off-again boyfriend, Jeffrey Buchanan, to Short Sands Beach in York, Maine. It was her favorite beach in the world, the place where she felt most at peace, the one she had wanted to show him for months. Their toddler son Jackson was at daycare back home in Massachusetts. Earlier that day, Rhonda had FaceTimed her mother Lori, who noticed Rhonda's makeup was smudged as if she had been crying. Nobody knew why. Nobody asked. And within hours, Rhonda would be gone. Rhonda was a medical assistant and mother of 3 sons from Bedford, Massachusetts. Her sister described her as a mermaid who always had her toes in the sand. She was studying to become a licensed practical nurse while raising 3 boys, the youngest of whom was just a toddler. She was building something. She had plans for herself and for her children. Jeffrey Buchanan, 33, was the father of her youngest child and had been in and out of her life for 7 years. His criminal record told the story of who he was long before that afternoon on the beach. In 2007, he had been arrested for a hate crime involving another person. In 2014 and 2017, he was convicted of holding Rhonda against her will, preventing her and her 2 older sons from leaving their home and forcing her to drive him to Logan Airport. He served 2 years in prison for that. Despite everything he had done, despite the record, despite the restraining orders, Rhonda took him back. They were discussing marriage. The people who loved Rhonda watched it happen and could not stop it. At 3:54 in the afternoon, Rhonda was in the middle of recording a Snapchat video for a friend when Buchanan struck her from behind. The Snapchat captures the moment. The frame jolts, Rhonda falls out of view, then an arm rises and falls, again and again. Surveillance footage from a nearby business confirmed what happened. Buchanan struck her with a rock behind a large rock formation while multiple beachgoers watched in horror and called 911. After the act, he dragged her body behind the rocks to conceal it, then walked away in blood-soaked trousers toward a nearby zoo. He was detained within minutes. Rhonda's mother learned of her daughter's passing only when the daycare called to say Rhonda had never arrived to pick up Jackson. She wouldn't be late and never not show up for her baby, Lori said. That phone call from the daycare is how a mother found out her daughter was gone. Buchanan claimed he blacked out, but the surveillance footage showing him deliberately dragging and hiding the body after the act destroyed that defense entirely. A person who blacks out does not take calculated steps to conceal what they have done. He dragged her behind rocks. He walked away from the scene. He was coherent enough to move in a specific direction. After 3 years of delays, psychiatric evaluations, and legal maneuvering, he pleaded guilty on March 21, 2024. the day before jury selection was set to begin, and was sentenced to 40 years in prison. At sentencing, the prosecution presented the actual rock in a plastic evidence bag and placed it in front of the court. The judge called it an act that was completely unprovoked and stated the defendant executed her and she never saw it coming. Rhonda's 3 sons now live with her sister Jessica. Her youngest, Jackson, was 2 years old at the time. He will grow up without his mother because of the man who was supposed to be his father. A woman who was studied to be a nurse, who was raising 3 boys, who loved the ocean, was at her favorite beach in the world, recording a Snapchat for a friend, looking out at the water she had always loved. She never saw what was coming from behind her. The Snapchat video captured the exact second her life changed and then ended. It is the kind of evidence that jurors never forget and that defense attorneys cannot explain away. It showed everything. But while Rhonda's case was captured on camera, the next one was so horrific that it changed Maine law, because the existing statutes did not have a category severe enough to account for what happened to an 18-year-old girl in a Portland apartment. Zoe Sarnacki. Zoe Sarnacki was 18 years old and worked at Bagel Works in Portland's Old Port. A former Deering High School student with a vibrant personality, she loved world religions, animals, and the arts. She had 5 cats and a close circle of friends who adored her. She was the kind of person people remembered meeting. She was also the kind of person who believed she could help someone everyone else had already warned her to stay away from. Chad Thomas Gurney was approximately 28, a former Liberty University lacrosse player who had suffered catastrophic injuries in a 2005 van accident. A severe brain injury, near loss of a leg, loss of most use of his left arm, requiring 20 surgeries. He received a multi-million-dollar insurance settlement that allowed him to live in Portland without working. After the accident, his personality shifted dramatically. He once told a friend he believed he was a prophet. He told another that the only thing he identified with was pain. He had the word pain tattooed across his knuckles. They met at a Portland tattoo shop in late March 2009. A tattoo shop owner warned Zoe to stay away from Gurney. She dated him anyway, believing she could help him. On Memorial Day, May 25, 2009, Zoe was napping in the loft of Gurney's Cumberland Avenue apartment. He climbed up and strangled her with his bare hands as she screamed for him to stop, then continued until she was gone. What happened afterward defies comprehension. Gurney committed acts on her remains, then decapitated her with a knife, describing it as this ritual almost. He placed a crucifix and other items around the body, purchased $2.50 of gasoline from a nearby station, returned and set the body and bed on fire, then drove to a motel in Old Orchard Beach. Firefighters found Zoe's charred, headless remains. Gurney was arrested the next morning and gave a 2.5-hour recorded confession, crying and calling Zoe his soulmate. "I killed the most beautiful girl I've ever met." But prosecutors discovered something on his computer that reframed everything. A link to an internet video depicting a horrific act carried out as punishment for infidelity, with a caption suggesting the person depicted would never do that again. Zoe had been intimate with another person while Gurney was traveling, the apparent trigger for what he did. At his bench trial in January 2011, Justice Roland Cole rejected the insanity defense and convicted Gurney. He was sentenced to 60 years, 50 for the primary charge and 10 for arson. Cole called it a horrific and incredible series of events and said he did not recall hearing anything else in the state of Maine even close. But the judge noted that the existing law did not allow for a life sentence in this case, because the mutilation occurred after Zoe was already gone, meaning the torture standard technically did not apply. That legal gap prompted Maine legislators to act. The case directly inspired LD 1565, which added extreme mistreatment of the body of the victim after passing as an aggravating circumstance justifying a life sentence. Before Zoe's case, Maine law simply did not account for what Gurney did. After her case, it did. Zoe's mother, Linda Sarnacki, offered a statement of extraordinary grace at sentencing. "I hope we can all heal after this, and I believe the only way to heal is with forgiveness. I forgive him." A vigil at Gurney's apartment building drew more than 150 people, the largest vigil of its kind in Portland's history. The Sarnacki family won a $1.35 million wrongful settlement, paid from Gurney's insurance money. His appeal was unanimously rejected by the Maine Supreme Judicial Court in February 2012. Gurney remains at Maine State Prison, not eligible for release until approximately 2059. Sarnacki was 18 years old. She believed she could help someone who everyone else told her to avoid. What happened to her was so extreme that the state of Maine had to write a new law to account for it. Her mother forgave him. The legislature made sure nobody else would receive the same inadequate sentence. But while Zoe's case changed the law after it was solved, the next two cases remain unsolved. And in both, investigators appear to know far more than they have ever been willing to say publicly. Amy Drake. Amy Lynn Drake was 18 years old and a young mother with a toddler daughter living in Skowhegan, Maine. Friends called her a Spitfire who loved adventures. She had dropped out of school and fallen into difficult circumstances and the wrong crowd, but she maintained daily contact with her mother Norma, either by phone or in person, without exception. If a day went by without contact, something was wrong. That had never happened. Not once. Her boyfriend was Jason Forbes, approximately 31 at the time, 13 years older than Amy. On July 2nd, 2006, Forbes struck Amy, broke her nose, threw her to the floor, and threatened to end her life. He was arrested and in September 2006 pleaded guilty to domestic assault. He received 6 months in jail. But here is the detail that may have cost Amy her life. He was given a delayed surrender date of October 9th, 2006, meaning he was not required to report to jail immediately. He remained free. The system sentenced him and then gave him weeks to walk around before he had to show up. Amy disappeared around September 16th to 20th, 2006, approximately 2 to 3 weeks before Forbes was scheduled to report. She left without her purse or a change of clothes. After 4 days without any contact, something that had never happened before, her mother Norma reported her missing. On November 24th, 2006, 2 days after what would have been Amy's 19th birthday, deer hunters found human remains in woods off River Road in Norridgewock, about 2 miles from the Skowhegan town line. The remains were confirmed as Amy. Her passing was ruled a homicide. The most extraordinary aspect of this case is what police have refused to reveal for nearly 20 years. The cause of passing has never been made public. Not to the family, not to the media, not to the public. As Lieutenant Gary Wright explained, manner of death is always an issue that we withhold. That kind of information can make or break the case. That deliberate secrecy, maintained across nearly 2 decades and multiple changes in personnel, strongly suggests investigators believe they know who is responsible, but lack sufficient evidence to bring charges that would survive trial. They are protecting the detail that only the responsible person and law enforcement know, waiting for the day someone says the wrong thing or the right piece of evidence surfaces. Detective Chris Tremblay has been assigned to the case since day one and continues investigating actively. Police have confirmed that a suspect has been interviewed. interviewed, but not charged. That distinction tells you everything about where this case stands. Amy's mother, Norma, has publicly stated she believes Forbes was responsible for her daughter's passing. Had Forbes been required to report to jail immediately upon sentencing rather than receiving the delayed surrender date, Amy would have been alive when he was locked up. The window of time between his sentencing and his report date is the window in which Amy vanished. Forbes has since accumulated additional criminal charges, including felony offenses. The $10,000 family reward remains unclaimed. The case is listed on the Maine State Police Unsolved Homicides page and was last publicly updated in 2023. Amy Drake was 18. She had a toddler daughter who needed her every day. She was in a relationship with a man who had already been convicted of harming her, a man 13 years her senior, a man the system had sentenced to 6 months in jail but then given weeks of freedom before he had to report. She disappeared during the exact window when he was free and waiting to surrender himself. Her remains were found in the woods on the weekend of what would have been her 19th birthday by deer hunters who stumbled onto something they were never looking for. Police know how she passed and have never told the public. Someone has been interviewed and never charged. The $10,000 reward remains unclaimed after nearly 20 years. And the question that Amy's mother, Norma, has asked every single day since 2006 remains the same. Why was he given those extra weeks of freedom? And would her daughter still be alive if he had not been? But while Amy Drake's case has at least a primary suspect, the next one has almost nothing. Just a phone call, a closet, and a boyfriend whose account of what happened does not match what investigators found. Tabitha Pursley. This is one of the most information-scarce cold cases in the entire state of Maine. And what little is publicly known raises far more questions than it answers. Tabitha N. Pursley, born June 11, 1985, was 24 years old at the time of her passing. She lived at 88 Elm Street in Lewiston, Maine, with her boyfriend, Joshua B. Gordon. Very little has been published about who Tabitha was, beyond those basic facts. Her story has not been told by true crime podcasts or major media outlets. She exists primarily as a name on a list maintained by the Maine State Police. At 5:37 in the evening, a 911 call came into the Lewiston and Auburn Dispatch Center from their apartment. The caller was Gordon. He reported that his girlfriend had hung herself inside her closet in their bedroom. That was his account. He was the only person in the apartment. He was the one who placed the call. He described a scene that, on its surface, pointed to one conclusion. But the medical examiner and investigators reached a very different one. Tabitha's passing was classified as a homicide, not what Gordon described. The Maine Cold Case Alliance categorizes it as a questionable passing, a designation that strongly implies investigators believe the scene inside that closet was staged. Something about what they found did not match the story Gordon told on the phone. Something about the physical evidence, the positioning of the body, the marks on her, the way the scene was arranged, told a different story than the one the 911 caller was presenting. The medical examiner looked at Tabitha's remains, examined the evidence, and determined that what Gordon described was not what happened. That is not a minor disagreement. That is a finding that directly contradicts the only account of events that has ever been given. No details have been released about what specific forensic evidence contradicted the narrative Gordon provided. The investigators have held that information close for years, refusing to share with the public the exact reasons they classified this as a homicide rather than accepting the account they were given. No one has ever been publicly named as a suspect. No charges have ever been filed. Gordon, as the sole person present in the apartment and the person who made the 911 call, is the only named individual in the case record. He was the last person to see Tabitha alive. He was the first person to describe how she was found. And his description does not match the conclusion of the people whose job it is to determine how someone passed. The case file is thin. The public information is thinner. What exists is a 911 call describing one thing, and a medical examiner's ruling that says it was something else entirely. Tabitha Pursley was 24 years old. She lived in an apartment on Elm Street in Lewiston with a man who called 911 and described finding her in a closet. Investigators looked at the scene, examined the physical evidence, consulted the medical examiner, and said no. They classified it as a homicide. That classification means someone was responsible for Tabitha's passing, and that person has never been identified publicly or charged. The case remains unsolved and is listed on the Maine State Police Unsolved Homicides page, investigated by the Major Crimes Unit South. The core of this case is a single contradiction: a boyfriend who says one thing happened, and a medical examiner who says something else did. One of them is wrong. In nearly every case like this one, the physical evidence tells the truth, and the person on the phone does not. But without enough to charge, without enough to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, the case sits on a shelf. Tabitha's name remains on a list of unsolved cases. Her story remains untold in any meaningful way. And the apartment on Elm Street holds whatever answers have never been shared with the public. But while the Pursley case may never be solved due to the extremely limited evidence available to the public and the unwillingness of investigators to release the forensic details that led to the homicide classification, the final case on this list was solved, taken to trial, and resulted in a conviction. And then the Maine Supreme Court threw the entire thing out. What happened to Kim Neptune and what happened afterward in the courtroom may be the most agonizing outcome on this entire list. Kim Neptune. Kimberly Kim Neptune, 43, was a member of the Passamaquoddy tribe at Pleasant Point, known as Sipayik in Perry, Maine. A Calais High School graduate who had attended the University of Maine, she worked as a seasonal housekeeper in Bar Harbor and was known for her big heart and gentle soul. Her brother Samuel Neptune Jr. described her as always willing to help neighbors. This was the first taking of a life in the Pleasant Point community in 50 years. On the night of April 20th to 21st, 2022, Kim Neptune was struck 484 times in her legs, stomach, neck, and head inside her apartment at 27 Thunder Road. The deputy chief medical examiner testified the attack continued even after she was already gone. The body was wrapped in a blanket and left on the bedroom floor, where her brother Samuel found her the next evening. The two people charged were Kaylee Brackett, 38, Neptune's self-described best friend, and Donald Dana Jr., 38, the father of Brackett's child. Neptune was reportedly the godmother of Brackett's son. She was not a stranger. She was not a rival. She was the person Brackett had trusted with her own child. In the days before, Brackett publicly accused Neptune of taking money from her. At the Perry Farmers Union store, she told people Neptune was going to pay. According to the police affidavit, Brackett and Dana planned to rob Neptune of approximately 300 pills and cash. Brackett dropped off her son at Dana's mother's house before the act, securing a babysitter for the evening. The investigation pieced together evidence from multiple directions. A neighbor's security camera captured a figure dressed in black near Neptune's apartment. A community member who had known Brackett her whole life was 100% sure it was her. Another witness created a photo collage comparing the surveillance stills to pictures Brackett had posted on Facebook wearing what appeared to be the same black face mask. Brackett was talking to anyone who would listen. She told a woman at the post office she had struck Neptune 5 times and went for her main organs. Donna allegedly told 3 people he was responsible. Brackett used Neptune's bank card the day after. The Passamaquoddy tribe offered a $10,000 reward. Both were arrested during a traffic stop on April 29, 2022. At trial in December 2023, the prosecution's case included Dana's blood at the scene, Brackett's threatening statements, surveillance footage, and testimony from podiatrist Dr. Michael Nierenberg, who said with moderate support that bloody footprints at the scene matched Brackett's feet. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury convicted Brackett of depraved indifference and deadlocked on Dana, resulting in a mistrial. Brackett was sentenced to 55 years on May 10, 2024. Then came the reversal. On February 5, 2026, the Maine Supreme Judicial Court vacated Brackett's conviction in a 42-page opinion. The court ruled that Dr. Nierenberg's footprint evidence was unreliable and should never have been admitted. He had used different socks than those found at the scene, had not accounted for Brackett's weight, and 2 of 3 major forensic organizations do not even recognize forensic podiatry as a legitimate field. The prosecutor's closing argument compounded the error by claiming the footprints matched and stating we know they were Brackett's, far beyond what the expert actually testified. While the remaining evidence was sufficient, the court ruled it was not overwhelming enough to render the footprint error harmless. The case has been remanded for a new trial. Meanwhile, Dana pleaded guilty to a single misdemeanor count of hindering apprehension, a dramatic downgrade from his original charge. The Sipayik tribal community is in shock. Rival council member Melissa Francis said the decision left the community in a state of shock. Kim Neptune was struck 484 times by people she considered her closest friends. A jury heard the evidence, deliberated for 3 days, and convicted the woman who had been her best friend. And then a higher court looked at the trial record and said the conviction could not stand because of a podiatrist's testimony about footprints and socks. Testimony that should never have been admitted, and a prosecutor's closing argument that overstated what the expert actually said. If Brackett is not retried, she could walk free. The community of Sipayik, where Kim Neptune lived and helped her neighbors and was known for her gentle soul, is waiting to find out whether justice will be attempted a second time, or whether the woman convicted of taking Kim's life will go home. 484 times. And the conviction was thrown out over footprints. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.